The chants are no longer subtle. Take your country back. Get him out. Not for the Conservatives. Not for reform. But, as many in the crowd insist, for something they believe has been lost: accountability, public safety, and a government that confronts issues such as knife crime and extremism directly rather than rhetorically. Inside the Commons, the exchanges have been no less heated. Allegations are dismissed as nonsense. Questions are deflected. When pressed on the two-child benefit cap, the Prime Minister pivots to foreign threats and geopolitical distractions. Critics argue it is a deliberate tactic: shift the focus to the Kremlin, to global instability, to anything but the domestic economic strain facing British households. References to international bodies, such as the OECT, are deployed as reassurance. But for many watching, those citations ring hollow against the lived reality of rising costs and stagnating wages. Tonight, London is not merely restless, it is outraged. Thousands have gathered outside Downing Street. This is not political theatre. It is a visible expression of frustration that has been building for months. The mood is not carnival, but confrontation. The Prime Minister, once regarded as the embodiment of measured, technocratic stability, now finds himself at the center of a storm that cannot be managed through messaging alone. Scenes outside Number 10 are telling. Protesters speak of their children, of being arrested, they say, for peaceful assembly. There are angry voices, certainly, some straying into divisive rhetoric, but the dominant tone is one of exasperation rather than extremism. The disappointment did not erupt overnight. It accumulated gradually as bold leadership pledges gave way to caution, as clarity dissolved into ambiguity. Over the past year, the first anniversary of Labour's return to government, expectations have collided with reality. In Parliament, even members of the Prime Minister's own party have described the administration as incoherent and shambolic. That criticism, notably, has not come solely from opposition benches. It reflects unease within Labour's ranks about direction and delivery. The charge sheet is familiar: no comprehensive plan to drive people back into work, no credible strategy to rein in welfare spending, and a succession of uncomfortable U-turns on winter fuel payments, on sensitive law and order issues that have eroded the perception of steady leadership. Meanwhile, opposition parties accuse the government of fiscal drift, pointing out that multiple parties in the House supported increased welfare expenditure, while arguing the country must live within its means. The deeper criticism, however, cuts beyond party lines. It questions what this government stands for. Detractors say the Prime Minister has reversed course so often, even recalibrating his own previous statements, that voters are left uncertain about his core convictions. And when conviction appears absent, authority weakens. Beyond Westminster, the debate over strategy feels remote. Inside Parliament, ministers speak of long-term frameworks and structural reform. Outside, families confront immediate pressures. The cost of living crisis is not theoretical. It is calculated at kitchen tables, late at night, in homes where heating is rationed and every purchase is scrutinized. Across the country, once stable industries are scaling back or closing altogether. Business leaders speak privately of feeling unsupported. Workers question where the promised revival has gone. The gap between political messaging and economic reality has become increasingly difficult to ignore. At the gates of Downing Street, the crowd is strikingly ordinary. There are no revolutionary flags, no fringe insignia. Instead, there are teachers, shopkeepers, delivery drivers, citizens who form the backbone of daily British life. They are not campaigning against environmental policy in principle, nor are they rejecting scientific consensus. Their grievance is more immediate. They feel unheard. They see significant public funds directed toward large-scale infrastructure and green initiatives, some involving international investment, while local councils struggle to finance basic services. They hear ambitious national targets, yet face personal crises when boilers fail or energy bills spike. They are told sacrifice now will secure a better tomorrow, but they are struggling to endure today. This is where the anger crystallizes. It is not solely about policy specifics. It is about a widening gap between rhetoric and lived experience. The Prime Minister once promised moral clarity and a break from the turbulence of recent years. He positioned himself as calm, pragmatic, and serious, the antidote to chaos. Yet stability without visible urgency has, in the eyes of critics, hardened into inertia. Supporters argue he is governing responsibly, resisting populist impulses. Critics counter that caution has become paralysis. When energy prices surged and small businesses faltered, they say the response was incremental and overly measured. Communities seeking swift relief were offered consultations and reviews. There is a growing perception that this is a leadership style that waits for polling confirmation, waits for consensus, waits until public pressure becomes unavoidable. But those outside Downing Street are done waiting. They insist that dignity cannot be deferred to the next fiscal statement. What began as scattered dissatisfaction has consolidated into something more forceful. It is no longer a murmur of concern. It is a sustained demand for action. And tonight, it is directed squarely at the gates of power. The question facing the Prime Minister is no longer whether criticism exists. It is whether he can convincingly demonstrate that his government understands the immediacy of the crisis confronting ordinary households, and whether he can act with the decisiveness that many now believe has been missing. Inside Downing Street, the lights remain on well past midnight. Advisors move briskly between offices, refining statements calibrated to sound decisive, yet remain deliberately non-committal. Communications teams prepare carefully balanced lines for the morning bulletins. But beyond the gates, that choreography is largely irrelevant. The crowd gathered outside is not responding to messaging. It is reacting to what it sees as months, if not years, of messaging in place of meaningful action. The demonstrators are not defined by party allegiance or ideological fervor. What unites them is fatigue. They speak of rising living costs, shrinking margins, and a growing sense that politics is something imposed upon them rather than conducted in their interest. For many, Sir Keir Starmer, once presented as a corrective to dysfunction, now appears remote, another voice within an institution that talks extensively but listens sparingly. It is important to note what this protest is not. It is not a wholesale rejection of climate policy, nor is it a demand for reckless public spending. At its core, it is an argument about fairness. Protesters question how billion-pound programs and long-term national strategies can coexist with households struggling to heat their homes. They ask why ambitious policy frameworks seem to deliver so little immediate relief to ordinary families. There is a palpable sense of disillusionment among those gathered. Many believe they were voting for a more serious, grounded form of politics, what was described as grown-up government. Now some wonder whether they were offered a more subdued version of familiar political habits, and when faith in that promise erodes, it does not do so quietly. It manifests publicly and visibly. What is unfolding outside Number 10 is not a publicity exercise. It is a reflection of national sentiment. The crowd represents a broad cross-section of the country, students struggling with heating bills, NH staff working extended shifts, skilled workers in towns that once thrived on industry but now face contraction and closure. They stand together not out of coordinated activism, but because they believe conventional channels have failed. For years, they were urged to be patient, to trust long-term plans and fiscal cycles. But patience diminishes when direct debits bounce and children sleep in coats. It wears thin when the language of economic resilience contrasts sharply with the reality of rationing energy use at home. The message from the street is not utopian. It is practical. People do not expect miracles. They expect competence and awareness of how policy decisions translate into lived experience. As chants echo through Whitehall, the significance of the moment becomes clear. This is more than a fleeting demonstration. It is a warning signal, a reminder that political capital is finite. When Starmer stood with union representatives and pledged to restore integrity to public life, he spoke in terms of service and principle. That message resonated. Yet critics argue that over time, the clarity of that commitment has faded. They point out that he is seen less frequently among striking workers or communities facing factory closures, and more often at controlled events where applause is guaranteed and disruption minimal. To those outside tonight, it feels as though their lived experience has been filtered through focus groups and strategic briefings. Their demands are not abstract. They are not calling for ideological confrontation. They are asking for inclusion, for policy shaped with a tangible understanding of its immediate consequences. They want to feel represented not just rhetorically, but materially. The stories emerging from the crowd are stark. Nurses skipping meals, pensioners limiting heating, students wearing gloves indoors. These are not partisan slogans, they are accounts of daily hardship. And the frustration cuts across traditional political divides. When hardship becomes the common denominator, ideological labels lose some of their force. There is also a deeper question being asked: how grounded are the decisions made behind the doors of government? Do policymakers fully grasp what it means to choose between rent and heating, or to decline a work shift because travel costs have surged? Whether that perception is entirely fair is almost secondary. In politics, perception shapes reality. The protests are not fueled by hostility alone. They are driven by the belief that silence now would mean invisibility later. When emails go unanswered and petitions fade into procedural channels, the street becomes the final forum available. Within Downing Street, the response remains measured. Advisors track social media metrics, assess broadcast coverage, and calculate the likely duration of public anger. Statements are issued in the language of reassurance. Yet this discontent does not resemble a passing headline. It appears more structural, the result of accumulated frustration over political detachment. Slogans about sustainability and transition no longer carry automatic authority when disposable income vanishes before month's end. Policies framed as progressive lose persuasive power if they seem to benefit those insulated from immediate hardship. The perception taking hold is that decision-making has drifted away from those who bear its consequences. It would be simplistic to attribute this solely to one individual. The frustration evident tonight has deeper roots in a political system that many feel has grown technocratic and distant. Nonetheless, leadership inevitably becomes the focal point. Supporters of the Prime Minister argue that he is steering the country through a complex and constrained environment, that difficult trade-offs are unavoidable and long-term reform requires discipline. That may well be true. But for the citizens gathered outside, progress is not an abstract trajectory plotted on a graph. It is measured in the weekly food shop, in the heating bill, in whether pay keeps pace with prices. The divide between strategic ambition and everyday reality has rarely been more visible. Ministers speak of transformation over years. Protesters speak of survival from month to month. This is not a revolt against change itself. It is a demand that change be equitable and attentive. Environmental reform, fiscal restructuring, energy transition, these are not inherently contested. What is contested is the impression that ordinary families are expected to absorb disproportionate strain without meaningful consultation or relief. That assumption is now being challenged in real time. One chart at a time, one placard at a time, citizens are asserting that governance is not a branding exercise. It is a contract. Ultimately, what is at stake is trust. Once eroded, it cannot be restored through carefully drafted statements alone. Leadership built on delay and distant struggles to withstand moments of acute hardship. And as the British public, often patient, often reserved, finds its collective voice, the message is unmistakable. Accountability cannot be deferred indefinitely. Behind the iconic black door of Number 10, strategy continues. But outside, the public mood has shifted. And when that shift becomes sustained and organized, no barrier, symbolic or physical, can entirely insulate those in power from its force.